Last March, New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio announced a $65 million bailout for city tax drivers, many of whom faced poverty and economic ruin as a result of predatory loans sold in the form of transferable city driving permits or medallions. After artificially inflating the prices of medallions and preying on unsuspecting drivers with exploitative loans, loosely regulated banks and private lenders made millions, forcing cabbies, many of them migrants, into crushing debt. According to the New York Times, between 2002 and 2014, the price of a medallion exploded from $200,000 to $1 million, even though city records showed that driver incomes barely changed. At least 950 tax drivers have filed for bankruptcy. Between 2018 and 2019, at least 6 have committed suicide.
Now, the Taxi Workers Alliance has staged a hunger strike, which is now on its 14th day. The union is urging the city for a more expansive and ambitious rescue package, saying $65 million is simply not enough to make any significant impact on affected drivers' debts, which average some $500,000. Zohran Mamdani is a New York State Assembly member who is taking part in the hunger strike. He joins us now to expand on all of this. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great. And what day of the strike are you on?
I'm on the 14th day. I started on the first day alongside the drivers, and we've kept it going now for 2 weeks.
And so what are the demands that you're hoping are going to be met in order for the hunger strike to end?
Fundamentally, the demand is for the city to guarantee these drivers' loans. And what that means is that if a driver were to default on their payments, that the city would step up and pay the balance to the lender. And that's critical for 2 reasons. One is because when these drivers have defaulted thus far, lenders have gone after everything that they own, their car, their home, their other assets that they may have. And 2 is that when you guarantee a loan, it then incentivizes the lender to offer more favorable terms to the driver because the risk has been eliminated from the equation. And so right now, the current relief program still allows for drivers to pay up to $2,000 a month. And that is just out of reach for almost all of the drivers who are currently operating a vehicle today.
And how much of this has to do with the gig economy, with Uber, with Lyft? Are some of these drivers folks who kind of got, the music stopped and they couldn't find a chair, so to speak?
I think that a lot of it has to do with the gig economy. And frankly, for many years, I thought that Lyft and Uber were the only villains in this piece. But when you look at studies of the last 10 years, because Uber and Lyft launched in about 2011, 2012, in that time, we have seen taxi driver revenue drop, with inflation accounted for, 44%. But there's still a lot more to this story, which is the fact that the Bloomberg administration created a bubble pre-existing the entry of rideshare. And that bubble was predicated on the desire to fill a city shortfall in the budget of $3.8 billion. And they did so by increasing artificially the value of these medallions by 500%, as you were saying, from $200,000 to $1 million, with no fundamental change in the market. So Lyft and Uber are villains in this story, no doubt, but they are not the only ones. That really begins with the Bloomberg administration.
In an era where everyone can get, Lyft and Uber, what is the argument for keeping this sort of current taxi regime in place at all?
Well, I think there are 2 arguments. One is that the city owes a debt to these drivers because the city sold these drivers an asset knowing that they had artificially inflated the value of it and that there was no real way for drivers to pay that back given the revenues that the city saw on the road. And the second thing is that the lenders, which were barred from operating in the housing market after 2008, were then welcome to operate in the medallion market. So not only are immigrant drivers, because once again, this is 94% of this workforce is immigrant, not only are these drivers entering into loan agreements for a principal that they will never be able to pay back because it's artificially inflated and unrelated to actual value, they're also entering into loan agreements that are predatory, some of them paying only interest, some of them paying loan agreements that have a massive balloon payment at the end. And then the second reason is that Lyft and Uber, as we know, their own predatory business model is one where they artificially deflate prices in the beginning when they enter into a market, starve out their competition, and once they are the only operators, they then inflate it to what they believe are the actual costs so they can reap profits. And so now you're actually finding in New York City that it is oftentimes cheaper to take a yellow cab to take Lyft or Uber.
And just anecdotally, we're seeing that here in Washington, D.C., that Uber and Lyft, with extremely low prices, managed to really wreck the local taxi situation. It's really hard to find, it's extremely hard to find a cab now. It was very easy, 5-10 years ago. And now, over the last year, you're really seeing Uber and Lyft hike their prices, and I don't think it's necessarily a coincidence. So that would be a reason, to keep these cabbies around. So since the city has more or less acknowledged that they screwed them in order to fill their own budget by artificially jacking up the prices, what is the mechanism? Like, what are the pressure points that you're pushing on to make this finally happen?
So there are multiple pressure points. One of them is escalating what was a 24/7 protest for 32 days into a hunger strike and doing it right outside of City Hall. And that has generated a lot of pressure and attention to this issue. The other is building out a massive coalition. We have a coalition that, at the top, it's Majority Leader of the U.S. Senate, Chuck Schumer, and then the entire New York City congressional delegation from AOC to Tom Suozzi, and then 74 city and state officials who've signed on in support of this call for a guarantee. Additionally, today we're actually going to be releasing a letter that has more than 20 unions across New York City supporting this call of the New York Taxi Workers Alliance. And I think that all of these things together, combined with the ability of building out a mass movement of people who have come to the site, who are protesting alongside us, who have joined in solidarity fasts. This has ensured that this is not just one of many issues in this moment in New York City. This has become the critical labor issue of the moment. Right. And we believe that there is a true possibility of resolving this, which is why we continue to be on strike.
And does it need to go back through does it need to go through the council? Can the mayor do this on his own? And if so, how much support in the council is there now? Are there a few holdouts that you're working on?
This is specifically in the purview of the mayor. And,
okay.
And we really...
So the mayor can do it on his own?
The mayor can do this on his own, and we think that there is a path forward here.
Okay.
Well, a current New York Attorney General and gubernatorial candidate, Letitia James, will join you outside City Hall today. James has long supported a city-backed guarantee on Medallion debt. Do you see her solidarity with drivers moving the needle on this at all?
I absolutely do, and I think that it's critical that we've had, everyone from AOC to visit us, to Scott Stringer visiting us, to, Jumaane Williams, to Carolyn Maloney, now Attorney General Tish James. This is where candidates and elected officials are coming to show their solidarity with labor as we fight for dignity for the working class. And I think that, one other thing to talk about in this situation is that I'm 30 years old. I'm on hunger strike. It's very difficult for me. There are many different physical complications, but it pales in comparison to these drivers who are 50, 60, 70 years old, have pre-existing health conditions, and are really not in a good state right now and shouldn't be on this hunger strike. And it's critical for them, as well as for the larger industry, that we resolve this as soon as possible. And so it means the world to see all of these elected officials come and stand in solidarity.
And how many drivers are on hunger strike, and what's the hunger strike involve? Water? What else are they allowing themselves? So
right now, I would say there are about 13 to 14 drivers who are on hunger strike. On Sunday, we had about 22 people join in solidarity outside of the drivers. And what hunger strike means for us is water, Gatorade, electrolytes in water, coconut water. It's very repetitive. It's the same few things. We see a doctor every day, but we've seen in our own bodies rapid weight loss, headaches, blurred vision, dizziness, faintness. There are a number of us for whom the doctor has recommended that we stay in a wheelchair because of what it might mean. After 2 weeks of depriving yourself of food, the consequences can be quite dire. And we've had a number of people actually who've been forced to get off of the hunger strike because of what it's meant for their own bodies.
Well, please stay healthy, and good luck with your continued activism. We really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
We'll have more Rising right after this. Stay with us.